Marie-Rose, thank you very much for joining us. I'm excited to talk with you. We've only just met. Can I begin by asking you about a sentence I read from your website, which said that Haiti is a great example of why the aid system needs to change. And I thought that'd be a nice starting point to think about the big picture and the ecosystems.
Thanks, Simon. It's very interesting because so many people have talked to me about this Haiti and the 2010 earthquake, which, by the way, the anniversary was yesterday. The 15th anniversary was yesterday, which was absolutely devastating. It was a learning experience for the humanitarian sector. Except that my issue is that it didn't feel like the sector didn't feel like it learned anything. So I felt like the same patterns were repeated, and even within Haiti, I would say 6 years after, when there was sort of like another devastating event with Hurricane Matthew, which was a very interesting one that stayed on for about 12 hours in one general area. And, the same patterns were there, not engaging with the communities, not walking enough, not with people. I mean, I read some of the reports that were issued afterwards. So, yeah, I mean, Haiti is a really unique example, because usually we Haitians get blamed for a lack of agency or lack of action and everything else. And it's fascinating because I, of course, have a completely different perspective, having been born and raised, and I've been extremely involved in Haiti and Haiti's community for the past 15 years, and discovering, after being involved in social change, discovering the humanitarian, philanthropic, and international development system, the aid system. So, I mean, I think everything has been amplified, because in so many ways, it was easy for people to sort of like come in and take over. I mean, it's an extremely fragile environment, an environment where in so many ways you had organizations that had larger budget than most of the, government, agencies, and dominated and controlled them and did whatever they wanted. So, I mean, there were reports that were issued by the Center for Global Development, which were fascinating, just showing that only 1.2% of the billions that had been received, like in the first 3 years after the earthquake, I mean, private and public funding, were directed to, local organizations and local businesses. No, actually, I'm sorry, it's 0.6%. It's less than 1%. I'm thinking 1.2 is about something else. So 0.6%. And they could not figure out, what the outcomes were. They could not figure out, and they could not track them. I mean, I think the woman there were a couple of researchers that were involved, and, I mean, one of the women was like actually planning to write a book. I don't know if she wrote it, because she was completely flabbergasted. So, yeah, I mean, and everything was, I mean, there were articles that came out, and there were scandals that came out, afterwards, and everything else. But the fact that nothing was done, I mean, that was basically, to be honest with you, criminal.
Yeah.
And that there was no sense of accountability of people being held responsible, of the damage being repaired, or anything of that sort. Is pretty bad.
Yeah, no, it's damning, and like you say, it sounds like an amplification of what goes on elsewhere. Like it's not a one-off example, but it's an amplified example. And I've been in this sector for only a short while. I mean, I did some work in Kosovo and Sudan maybe 20 years ago, and then I came back to work with the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And my research and my coming in from the outside, so to speak, and seeing it was that there's this real lack of mutualism. That there's still a kind of a salvation aid kind of mentality, a power over mentality, which is still fairly endemic. And you talk a lot about the community and engaging the community. Do you want to say something about those power dynamics and what stops that community engagement?
You know, I've had the experience of being a consultant, of working on what people call the field in sort of like global South environment, of doing program evaluation, of analysis and everything else. So just looking at from different, and being an activist working on as part of international networks and everything else. So it's interesting in terms of the perspective. I mean, people are trying to define what community engagement means. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting for me. I mean, I wrote an article about, the fact that at one point there was this big idea about, participation revolution. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, participation revolution? I mean, what is revolutionary about participation? If it's my country, I don't just want to participate, I want to lead it. Mm-hmm. And it really, I mean, one of the things that I've been saying over and over again, and I think if anybody has heard, read some of my things, I just keep repeating these things because, for me, it's essential. It's like, what is the purpose of aid? Yeah. Is the purpose of aid about ending aid, which, it projects to be? Mm-hmm. And if it is, okay, we're talking about something completely different here, because all of the research shows that basically what you have in a sector is about, the approach is about reinforcing itself and continuing to be there. And in so many ways, creating a certain level of dependency and not necessarily engaging the community from the design to the implementation to the leadership, not taking the community's lead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it does feel like there's a pattern of just reproducing the same kind of elitist model, the same sort of top-down model, the same centralized model. And there's a layer of language which people use, and there's many different words they use for localization or decolonization or partnerships, but actually very little changes substantially. What do you think is behind that, though? Why doesn't it change from your perspective? You've got such a great experience and wide experience. What stops it changing? Because when I talk to people, there's people who say they want to change it. There's a desire to change it, and yet something stops it. What do you think that is?
I think we're trapped. Mm. I think in so many ways, and I'll speak in general terms, that, the status quo sort of has a way of not only protecting itself, but reinforcing itself. Yeah. We've had decades and decades. I mean, if you look at the global north or, the history of sort of creating a structure, an elaborate structure that is bent on protecting itself. I mean, if you apply for a job, a position, people will want to know what you've done, and then what is sort of like your progression and everything else. But it's along a certain type of mentality. And in so many ways, I mean, you get sort of rewarded for conforming.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and no matter what people say and talk about sort of like mistakes or questioning and everything else, these are the things that you get punished for, whether as an individual or an organization. So, I mean, how the heck are we supposed to be producing change if structural change is not welcome, is not truly welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely an investment in kind of the status quo, and it reproduces itself over and over again, and power remains in the same places. But there's also, I think about change in different ways. There's structural change, but there's also, I mean, I'm a student of psychoanalysis and the unconscious in organizations, and I study emotions and unconscious processes. And I also see that this kind of unconscious process of power dynamics where people they consciously desire change, they consciously want to do good. They join the humanitarian sector because they're motivated, and yet beneath that there's something that keeps them entrapped in almost like a mindset of not changing. And I wondered if you'd experienced that in your work.
There is a mindset of not changing because in so many ways, it's like we want to think that we're doing well, we're doing good. We're being good doobies because we're following the policies, we're doing some good stuff. And then when there is some dissonance, we try just in terms of our comfort to sort of, rationalize it. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, otherwise we put ourselves at risk, or we put our jobs at risk, or people will question, or will feel like either idiots, or will feel like rebels without a cause or something like that. The problem with all of that is that it's hard to do things alone.
Yeah.
Okay, you need to be connected, and it needs to be part of a collective. And most of the time, what is not funded is this kind of work.
Yeah.
And we also have very busy environment where spaces for people to think and question are not like necessarily there. Everybody's busy, whatever they are doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when do we have the time to sort of like step back, think, or think in ways that are not structured? Because even liberal thinking very often has certain patterns that you're supposed to follow.
Sure, sure. Now you're touching some things very close to my heart. I mean, one reason I wanted to work with Kate and with Pledge and is because, I talk about the only way to change an ecosystem is through an ecosystem. It's like you have to get a countercultural ecosystem. You can't do it alone, or you can't do it from top down, but you have to kind of lead from the edges, and you have to get a countercultural narrative and support and networks to sort of mobilize change. As social movements in the past have shown us, change can happen, but it happens from the edge, not from the center.
I agree with you. I mean, one of the things that, we did for the Haiti Community Foundation, where we were trying to kind of like set it up, we started with communities. And when we started with community, we basically did not just say, because that happens a lot, people say, oh, we're coming. We asked if we could come. So that was like one thing. The other thing is that we let the community lead. And sometimes that can be very difficult, because myself as a facilitator, it's kind of like a dance, how much do I, whatever, people have to have the space to do what they want to do, to make mistakes. You can advise, but you cannot, you push, and you do want to try to provide some ideas and everything else. So, I mean, I think that one of the things that we did, because we sort of like realized that one of the biggest issues of Haiti, and similarly to sort of like other global South countries, is the social fragmentation. Communities being fragmented, not working together because of lack of trust, lack of communication, because of various issues and everything else. So one of the things that we did was, and it was, very, funny, because like, oh, you didn't do anything for the first, few years. No, we took, what we did, we undertook with very, very limited financial support, probably one of the largest undertaking that the organization has ever, done, which was a regional planning process over 2.5 years. And what people have to understand is that 2.5 years staying the course meant, because that was of a region we were talking about, and we engaged hundreds of people and people from different sectors, and we went from one commune to the next. A lot of these people, some of these people are not seen, are not being touched like or talked to external people like for, decades, as in having some sort of a community process. So this actually was like amazing, because I was there for several meetings. It was led by the regional people, because what it meant, it was that you had people coming from different sectors, and they were like, we're not talking about huge communities here at first. Eventually we ended up bringing together the whole region, but they had not talked to each other. So they were supposed to be assessing, it was part of the community planning, assessing strengths, challenges, weaknesses, and everything else. We came from a perspective of they were the leaders, they knew best, we were going to listen, not to oppose, and then bringing them in small groups. The excitement was palpable. And then for people realizing when they were supposed to be setting some priorities, realizing that some of them who had not been talking, that they were sharing similar concerns, priorities, or interest. And at the end of the meeting, we realized that they didn't have to wait for the foreigners. They didn't have to wait for the government, that if they put their heads together, they would form something and they could address some of the priorities on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been my experience when I traveled to Zimbabwe, traveled to different countries, that where major funding's been cut from the center, when there's been problems, that when they explore their own ecosystems, they find more resources, that they work mutually, that they're pushed into this position where this kind of ecosystem actually has a lot of hidden resources within it, and there's a lot of talent within it. There's a lot of people who can be energized if given the permission, or if they can see a way of working with others, and that's been something I've seen as well. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you was there's a theorist called Vamik Volkan, and he writes about generational change and how generational patterns get passed on, and generational traumas. And I was thinking about Haiti. Am I correct in saying it was the first slave country to get its own freedom, to liberate itself? And I was thinking about the generational persecution almost of Haiti, almost like a generational kind of punishment for that liberation. And we've got a colleague here from Cuba, and I was thinking, well, and Cuba threw off its shackles as well, and that's been constantly, ground down. Did you see this pattern happening at all? Does that resonate?
Oh, absolutely. I think you've got to think about 1804 here.
Yeah.
It's 1804, and contrast it to the fact that, when you go to countries in Africa, they talk about colonial times. And for a lot of them, we're still talking 1960.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So think about the fact that slavery was an essential part of the building of wealth of nations, okay, of colonizers, of colonial nations. It was essential. So much of it we've inherited. We may not track it. We may not be aware. A lot of people may not be aware of it, but it shaped the systems. And all of a sudden, you have this nation, this organization, this nation, this group of slaves that defeat Napoleon's army.
Mm-hmm.
And not only defeat Napoleon's army, but also sort of like declare their country sort of a haven of freedom. Anybody that set the part in the Constitution, the feet in Haiti, and that happened, for example, to Jamaican runaway slave, and the fact that we were critical in helping countries in Latin America. Bolivar, we offered money, soldiers, ammunitions to help, and we spread it. We spread freedom. We help to destroy not just slavery and the system of slavery, but very specifically address it regularly, even with limited resources. We were the troublemakers. So, and then you also have to understand, Simon, that in so many ways, like in different countries, people were so afraid that they proactively decided to kill their slaves. In different parts of Africa, in the US and everything else. They were afraid of what happened. Just think about just a number of different nations coming together and said, no, it cannot exist. Let's just crush it.
Yeah. And continue to crush it. Like, continue like soft economics or whatever, military invasion. Either way, can you continue to undermine it? I think these generational patterns of colonialism are still very much with us, and we see them play out very, in different ways, sometimes very explicitly, sometimes implicitly, but they're still fundamentally there. Do you see any what do you see the future of for INGOs? Do you see them like taking a radical view? Do you see them disappearing? Do you see them taking up a different position? Do you see humanitarianism being deprofessionalized? What's your kind of overall perspective, or what thoughts you have on that?
I mean, I think some people, there is this growing awareness that the model needs to change, but I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult because, again, they've built entire elaborate structures. They are being rewarded for growth. They have the support of the donors. The donors are more comfortable with that. Some of it is starting to change, but there's a lot of resistance. The good news, you have initiatives that right now are trying to sort of create different pathways, including sort of like the Pledge for Change. Thank you, by the way, for the very nice introduction, Kate. But, I think it's also key to talk about, Kate being open and then working with various stakeholders. It's a very complex undertaking, and it's very sort of like sensitive. The reality is that people can talk about change, and the same way they can have policies. Okay, it's like, oh, here's a policy, here's a this. If you put it someplace, there's a difference between policies and operations. It's the same way with it's the difference between laws and the application of the laws. And this is where where it gets dangerous. It's like, this is where you find unequal approach to the application of the laws or the policies or the inconsistencies. And change, if it really needs to happen, needs to be operationalized and institutionalized to a point where it's part of the day-to-day business, and it's down to people's, job description, performance evaluation, and all of this wonderful stuff. Otherwise, forget it. It's really up to the individual, and it doesn't necessarily happen at a systemic level.
I write about the new age we're in now, and I call it the precarious interdependent age, because with the environmental changes and with the technology coming, there's constant disruptions. There's going to be polycrisis after polycrisis. We live in an age of precarity, and even politics. You can even look across at the United States. There's precarious politics there. Things don't feel stable. They feel unstable, and yet we're completely interdependent on each other. For climate reasons, for many other kind of reasons. That there's an interdependency with nature and with each other, and these that leaves in an unusual place where, on one level, things are very difficult to change, like you say, because they're so institutionalized, they're so stuck. On another level, they can change very, very quickly. And I'm like the aid situation is will funding continue the way it's been happening. You know, I talk to quite a lot of people, and they think the age system is very vulnerable at the moment. That it's a fragile system. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, here's the problem: is there has been an erosion of a sense of community because it all comes down to values. Erosion of a sense of a community, okay, growing inequality and growing sense of fear.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be, and part of it is technology, and part of it, a lot of it is technology, the ease of communication, and the fact that the world has gotten smaller. So we may be interdependent, but you know, we're in denial, right? To the extent where, if you think about 100 and something years ago, where communication channels were not, and technology wasn't so prevalent, people could stay in their own community and said, oh, I know the truth. My God is the God, and my people are this.
Yeah.
Now it's very difficult to escape the fact that no, there is very high diversity, and it's very unsettling for people because, you know, we are not taught to be flexible. We are not taught complexity. We are not taught to be critical. And, you know, and forget about, you know, being teenagers and rejecting everything. There is a sense, because the world is changing, if as adults we haven't really taken stock of our values, okay, figure out who we are, haven't been exposed to different things and been thoughtful about analyzing the context, you know, that we evolve in, our values, what we want to do, and be realistic and honest and self-aware, you know, we'll continue to follow patterns that have been taught to us.
Sure. Marie-Rose, we're coming to an end of our conversation. I wondered if there's anything else you would like to share with the participants and those listening to this conversation, anything which we haven't covered, I think, which is important to you.
I would just say to people that fear is okay. We all have fears. It's about having the courage of a conviction. And it doesn't need to be a revolution. It just needs to be sort little by little, doing something that you think is meaningful. And also being part of a collective, because in so many ways, talking about the status quo, we don't necessarily value connections. We say we do, but we really don't. And it's essential.
Yeah, sure. Marie-Rose, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your sharing. It's been really, really great. We're going to stop here and pass back to Kate, who's going to put the participants into groups. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon.